Hello world, and welcome to this edition of Tech on Fire with Blaze. I'm Blaze Stewart, architect at Linux. Today we're going to be looking at Azure Advisor and how you can use this to get security recommendations, as well as a number of other kinds of recommendations for resources on Azure. Hi guys, today we're going to be looking at Azure Advisor and how you can use this to get best practice advice on Azure. So the best practice advices on Azure come in 4 categories. They come under security, performance, cost, and availability. So the first category of security is really one of the most widely used categories that Azure Advisor covers, and it does a pretty good job at doing some basic checks against many common things on Azure for security best practices, such as ports exposed on virtual machines. It's going to make recommendations to you that you might want to turn on or turn off depending on what you're doing in a virtual machine, so that you can improve your security posture on those virtual machines. It'll do the same thing for things like databases and app services and other resources, and it's going to be doing that against best practices. Now, of course, it's not going to do as much analysis as something like Security Center was, but given that this is a free resource, you can definitely take advantage of it if you're not using Security Center, or if you're using Security Center. Even so, you're still going to get a lot of good recommendations in security from Azure Advisor. Performance is another area that it covers fairly well as well. It looks at not only things that are under provisioned, but things that are over provisioned in terms of performance. So things that are under provisioned, it's going to monitor things like IOPS on a disk, the CPU on a virtual machine or an app service or a database, network IO, and these kinds of things. And it's going to monitor that to look for things that might be over provisioned, so that you can scale those back and get performance more in line with what you're actually doing, or look for under provisioned resources and recommending scaling things up so that you get, again, performance that's going to be more in line with what you're actually trying to do with your application, virtual machine, or database, whatever the resource might be. So that's a really good tool for doing that kind of analysis on your resources that you have deployed. Cost is the 4th category, and cost is, of course, going to be looking at how you can save money on Azure so you can lower your monthly bill on Azure. And it's going to be looking for things like provisioning, of course, related to performance, so that if you can reduce your performance needs, then of course you can save money by using less resources like CPU and RAM and disk storage on your given resources, and you can save money by scaling things back and so on. It'll also make recommendations like turning VMs off if you don't need them in off hours. So you can use that as a way of saving money. If I don't need a VM to be on 24/7, I just need it during my work hours, 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, then most of the time that virtual machine can be off, and I will only have to pay for the CPU and the RAM utilization. I still have to pay for storage, but the CPU and RAM utilization, which tend to make it the bulk of the VM anyway, for about 1/3 of the time, versus a full-time virtual machine that I forget to turn off. It'll make recommendations along those lines for cost savings. And then the last category it looks at is availability. Now, for availability, it's looking at your virtual machines, your app services, and these kinds of things. It's going to make recommendations that you can improve the availability of your resources on Azure by, say, putting something into an availability group or an availability zone, or making something more highly available by simply configuring it differently inside of your Azure resource. And these kinds of recommendations help improve your application's presence on the web or on the network, or whatever it is you're trying to do with that particular application or database. Having the availability recommendations will make your application more resilient to outages and things like that on Azure, and they do tend to happen from time to time, and even sometimes it's inadvertent, like you might deploy bad code to a particular VM and there's a bug in the VM that gets an update, and you can still have your other VMs available, or something might be updated by Microsoft in the background and you might have an update domain, and therefore you might want to have availability for something like an availability set, or put your application in another availability zone for that matter. So there's a lot of availability recommendations it'll make related to virtual machines, databases, and storage, and you can follow those as well. Let's go over to the Azure portal and take a look at Azure Advisor and see what it looks like, and we can get some of the recommendations for my stuff because there's several things that I haven't turned on, and for various reasons, but I do want to show you what it looks like and how you can get advice for free from Microsoft on how you can better use Azure for your applications. I'm here in the Azure portal now, and I'm going to go down to Azure Advisor from the hamburger menu. I just simply click on Advisor, and that's going to pull up everything that we talked about on the slide. Now, this has a separate category called Operational Excellence, and this is Azure Advisor talking about Azure monitoring Azure itself. So this is going to be related to recommendations for monitoring outages on Azure. That is, if something was to go awry within the context of the greater Azure sphere, that is everything that is involved with Azure, I can set up alerts for that if I wanted to. Now, that's not going to really have a big impact on what I'm doing inside of some of my specific resources, but it might be something that you want to turn on in the event that you want to be notified when something does happen on Azure. That's what this is really talking about. The rest of these are the things that are relevant to the actual resources that I have deployed, and those categories, as I mentioned, are cost, security, I call it availability or reliability, and performance. So let's take a look at cost here. Now, this is making two recommendations for me that I have available in my particular case here. I have some VMs that are over provisioned, and I have some IPs that are not associated with resources. So I could remove this public IP address, and I could remove this, do some of these VM fixes right here. So these are some dev VMs. I do use these, and they have stayed on for a while. This one I could probably shut down, so I need to probably do that because it's not being utilized very often. But this one I do use occasionally, and truthfully I could probably shut that down because I don't use it very much. I use it probably 1 or 2 hours a week for dev work, but in any case I could shut this one down indefinitely and not be impacted by it. It's actually pretty expensive, so I could save about $800 a year, $857 a year by simply shutting that VM down. I could still keep it around, and I'd still pay the storage costs, but even so, I'm not really using it for anything. I was using it for some dev work, and I could shut that down because I'm not really using it anymore. So those are some good things I will probably follow up on since I am looking at those now. Now, security here, you're going to see a lot of things that I have wrong with my particular subscriptions here, and the reason why is because these are dev subscriptions. I don't really want to put any production work in here, so a lot of this stuff is stuff that I could consider if I was putting this in a production oriented environment, but because this is dev stuff, I don't really pay a whole lot of attention to it, but it's something that if I was seeing this in a production environment, I would definitely want to follow up on all this stuff. And it's talking about turning on MFA for my subscriptions that I have turned on, or turning on log analytics for virtual machines, or turning on Azure Defender for SQL databases, because this is all dev stuff. This is not stuff that I really need to care about because there's no production workloads here. But in any case, I would definitely want to turn this on for tests for production and QA stuff. So in any case, this is some stuff that you can pay attention to and get some high impact out of these particular things that it's recommending to me. But notice what it is looking at. It's looking at subscriptions, management, virtual machines, databases, more virtual machines, storage accounts, more recommendations for subscriptions, and so on, that you can turn on, or these security recommendations that it is making here. Now, under reliability or availability, it's talking about some virtual machine stuff that I could do to improve my availability of my virtual machines. Some of my virtual machines are dev VMs, so it's going to say maybe you want to put this into something like a turn on locks, or makes turn on things like that to prevent me from deleting these. There's a couple of VMs that I use for dev work, and of course these are VMs that are for good or for better or worse, are going to be what they are, and I could definitely turn on things to prevent me from accidentally deleting those or things along those lines. And so it's enable virtual machine backups, and if I accidentally deleted it, I could restore that. And it's saying enable machine replication for regional outage. It's not something I really care about for dev work. Enable soft deletes on my storage account, so in case I accidentally delete something in a storage account or something like that. Very good recommendations for production-oriented workloads, but again, not things I'm going to be too concerned about for this dev space here. But again, these are very good recommendations that I'm getting for free on Azure. Now, performance, I'm not really getting any recommendations here because I don't really have a lot of performance things that I really need to worry about here. I could turn this on and then get some for performance if I was monitoring this, but I really don't have anything that is making any recommendations for me right out of the gate right here for performance, tuning up or tuning down my particular workloads. I can get some of that based on cost or right here because it's saying underutilized virtual machines. That's kind of indicative of some performance that I have going on there, so I could save money there. But in terms of just overall performance, there's nothing that's outstanding here. You are following our performance recommendations, so there's nothing that it's telling me that I should do otherwise. So again, if I did have something on performance, it would show up there, but I don't see anything. So here's just a quick tour of free advice from Azure, how you can better utilize Azure right out of the gate. It's available in the portal. It's looking at everything kind of synoptically, so you can get some very good recommendations for security, reliability, cost, and performance for free from Azure without any extra costs associated with you. So again, a very useful tool, and it's very useful for security, particularly. And you saw all the security recommendations it made for free for my dev subscriptions, and you could definitely use that for production-oriented workloads as well. So again, something very useful. Recommend you take a look at it in your production environments and in your QA environments, or even in your dev environments. If you like this content, please consider visiting us online at www.wintellect.com, and there you can find about services that Wintellect offers, including training and consulting services. Also, please consider subscribing to this channel by clicking on the subscribe button and clicking the bell icon to get notifications when new content becomes available, and also comment down below. You can also follow me on Twitter at @TheOneMule, and also follow Wintellect on Twitter at WintellectNow or at Wintellect. We are constantly posting things about Azure-related technologies and things related to software development. You can also reach us by email at consulting@wintellect.com. Until next time, thank you.